So, like I said, we're going to be working with rigging. Every assignment we're going to be talking about for the rest of the semester is going to be focused on working with different parts or different aspects of what can go into a complete character rig. I'm going to be breaking them up into sub-rigs, small assignments that you guys hopefully will be able to complete using the techniques we'll be talking about for that week. Okay? I will be expecting you guys to be stacking these techniques so that if we go over FK chains one week and then we do ribbon spines the next week, you guys will be implementing both of those into the assignment for that week. Okay? It's not a huge thing. It's just that you guys will be seeing how stuff goes together in different ways so that when you get to the final character rig, you'll be like, oh, this is really easy. And you'll be able to make it and put it together, and it'll be great. All right? So, we're basically going to be working with the first assignment this week is going to be FK chain rig. That's a really, really simple setup using parent constraints and parenting hierarchy with bones and geometry. We're going to be doing a little bit of skinning with that. Next week, we're going to be doing ribbon spines, which, I don't know, does Morin still go over that in like Intro to 3D? No? Okay. I think he said he used to. And that's like a really simple way, or not a simple way, but it's a really effective way of making like cartoony, deforming tentacle spine type things. So like tails, tentacles, spines, necks, stuff like that. That's really good for doing ribbon spines. We're going to be doing what's called a reverse foot setup for a character, and that's basically where you have a leg that is controlled by a central controller. And then that is connected to what's called a IK or inverse kinematic system, where you can basically just pick up the foot and move it around as one piece. And it's kind of cool. We're going to be working with what is called Sep Driven Keys. So Sep Driven Keys are attributes that we can add to a controller that allows us to make a rig do really like specific things. So like in a reverse foot setup, we have all these different Sep Driven Keys, which are right here, that allows us to make the character's foot do interesting stuff. So like pick up a heel or wiggle toes. If you're maybe rigging a starship, maybe you have like doors that open up with just a simple controller. So we'll be using those as well. We're also going to be doing what's called Kfk Switches, and those are used a lot on the arms. Well, they're also used on the legs, but they're used on the arms. And that's where we combine the knowledge of an FK chain and an IK system so that we can have basically a dual control system on a rig. So we can have an FK system where we can move the arm up and down like that from each joint, and then we can swap it over using a switcher control right here to where we can basically have a simplified system where we can then pick up the wrist and move that around, and it moves the entire arm. So we'll be working with using Sep Driven Keys that can control that. Okay. We're also going to be doing face setups where we have characters that can have basically moving eyes, opening and closing mouths, joints on the lips and the mouth that allows us to make the character smile, blend shapes that allow us to sculpt very specific expressions like opening and closing eyes, smiles, frowns, mouth shapes like smooches, like wide, like where you're pulling the lips back, stuff like that gets activated through the use of a facial control system. So we can create all sorts of different types of facial expressions. Okay? And so once we get through all of those assignments, then you guys will be basically taking all of that and applying that to an entire character that would be of the complexity of Louis. Okay? Doesn't mean you're going to be doing Louis, but something on that same scale. Now usually I will have characters that you can choose from, but you're also free to essentially either create your own or use one that you already have, i.e. your characters you just made. You see how this kind of like links all together? So the idea is that you will know how to not only sculpt a character on your own, you can retop with the character on your own, you can then rig the character on your own, and then you can animate that dude on your own. So you have your own idea that's just going all the way through the pipeline into, you know, a short film or a feature film that you're working on. That's pretty cool, I think. Because honestly, one of the things I hated the most about being in your position when I was a student was that I was basically saddled with only being able to use rigs that I could find online. And I'm not going to lie, those rigs I find online kind of suck. And everyone uses them. So why not rig something you have built yourself, right? Technically, you could rig it as it is posed, but a lot of stuff we can mirror over, and so it makes more sense for it to be in a symmetrical pose. What was your robot again? What was he doing?
The milkshake one, and he's holding like a tray and a milkshake with like one hand. The other hand, he's like opening the little.
Like, was his arm actually the tray?
No, he had an arm and it like connected to the tray.
Okay. So if that's like his neutral position, if that's what he's like built naturally to have, then you could absolutely rig him like that, for sure. There's nothing that would stop you or keep you from doing that. There's just an added level of complexity because you're going to have to accommodate both arms, and so that's just going to be extra work.
And then what about, it's in different parts right now, would I combine the mesh in order to start rigging?
Not for the robots. So you'll see, I'm going to open up a robot and I'm going to start working on him. Okay? So let's simplify this a bit because I think Louis might be a little bit intimidating. But this is what we're shooting for, okay, at the end of the semester. I want you guys to be able to make something as complex as him. Well, let's go with something simpler. So this is a robot arm. This is the level of complexity that I'm looking for this week's assignment from you guys. You can make your own robot arm if you want, but I need something that has at least, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points of articulation, and then something that we can use to do a Sep Driven Key or have an automated movement of some sort. So for him, for this robot, he's going to have at least 6 points of articulation, being a rotation down here, 1, 2, 3, 4 pivots, and then a rotation here at the base of the claw, and then one have an automated controller that's going to open and close the claw. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. You can make one of these if you want. You can find something online if you want, or you can use your own robot.
If it's attached to a character, is that fine?
That's fine. Honestly, if the character isn't too complicated, I would say maybe just give it a shot and rig the whole character using the setup that we're doing. Because what we're going to be doing today is really simple. It's not complicated at all. Carter?
Will this be due on Thursday?
No, this will be due when you come back. So the next Tuesday that we're back. So actually, you guys got a long time to work on this, unless you're going out of town. Then, like, you get normal amount of time. But honestly, you guys could be done with this by tonight if you wanted to. Okay. So let me show you an example of the final rig that I did. So with these rigs, every rig is going to have a control system that's on it, and I tend to use a very similar naming system when it comes to my controllers, and I tend to always have at least the same types of controllers built onto my rigs. So what I'm talking about is all of my rigs have what I refer to as a WorldCon. The WorldCon is a controller that moves everything. Like, if I go and grab that controller and move it, it will move the entire character, mesh, whatever it is. All right? That is a controller that I can grab, so if I reference in the character into one of my shots, I can easily move it over to, stage right 25 meters if I need to put it over there, okay? So that's a really simple controller for me. This is, again, everything that is attached to the character. So any weapons, accessories, capes, robotic monkeys that attach to the back, whatever that goes with it, it's going to be under that Worldcon, okay? Additionally, I also have a RootCon. So the RootCon is going to be essentially a controller that allows me to control, and this is going to be kind of odd since this guy doesn't have any legs, but this allows me to control the top half of a character. So a RootCon, if I go over to Louis, is generally going to be located around the waist, and you'll notice that if I move him, it does not move the entire character. It moves the top half, but not the legs, because the legs actually stay in position. This is because the legs are in an IK system right now, which means those controllers are independent of the root, which is good. That's what we want. When I'm going to have a character walk, I want to be able to have the feet actually stick to the ground. That'd be kind of weird if the root dragged the feet along with it. So that's why I have it set up that way. In this particular example, I don't have any legs, but the root for me allows me to offset the character in a certain distance, or I can move it in addition to wherever the Worldcon is. So if I move the Worldcon to wherever this character is going to start, and then I can basically translate and animate the character using the RootCon. And if I need to ever reset it back to its original position, I can take the translates and rotates and reset them to 0, and boom, right back to its origin, which is going to be where my Worldcon is. That's really important. All of your controllers, you should be able to reset back to 0, and your character will take a normal neutral position again, whatever the position was or the pose was when you rigged him initially. Okay, that's really, really important. You'll notice that, let's say if I take all of these joints, all these controllers, and move them, everything is going to have translations and rotations on it. But if I go back and change it back to 0, I can undo all of that in an instant. That's really important because you may screw something up with a rig. You may do something you don't understand what is going on. It's like, what the hell did I just do? So you should be able to always undo that by setting it all back to 0. Okay? So that's super important. So anyway, I got the RootCon and the Worldcon. A lot of times I'll have another controller in here called a placer con or a placement con. That's just an additional con that's going to be a controller that's going to be basically in between the root and the world. Okay, this is just something if I need to offset the character from the root or whatever, so I can have like a pivot point. That's all it is. So I can maybe orbit a character around something or whatever. It's not required for this. A lot of times with my rigs, I try to think of things from the point of view of the animator. I try to rig stuff in a way that makes it easier for them to do their job. So I may end up locking down portions of my rig so that they can't accidentally break something. I may limit certain things on the rig so that, if you can't bend, like our elbows, like don't bend backwards, they're not supposed to. So you may lock a portion of a rig so that it can't bend the elbow backwards. So, like for example, let's see, I think I have it limited on here. So basically I have it limited to where when the elbow here rotates, it can't move past where the geometry starts to hit. That's just something I put in there, so it limits it. So it's useful in that way. Additionally, I can't move the elbow out of the joint itself, and I can't rotate it out of the joint. So that's useful. You can't break the rig. You'll see here that I even limited the inputs for the controller. So right now it can only rotate on the Z-axis. Same thing here. This one's only on the rotate Z-axis, and then this one is rotate on the Y, so that I can spin the claw. But I can't move it, can't do anything else. So yeah. You'll see right here, I have a claw open and closed. This is an example of a Sep Driven Key. So what I can do is just click on this little guy right here and middle mouse drag, and I can open and close the claw all at once. Okay? All right, so that's what I'm going to be working for this rig. All right, any questions so far? Okay.
So if we decide to build our own robot arm, does it need to have four handles?
It needs to match at least this complexity. So you need to have, I think I said what, like 6 points of articulation?
A
So.
tentacle wouldn't work for this assignment?
No. We're going to be working with tentacle stuff next week. So if you can get your fill of tentacle things then, okay?
So pretty much make a robot with 6 moving parts.
Sounds good to me. All right. So let's go and get started. So we're just going to be really simple here. I'm going to make my controllers by going under Create. I'm going to go to NURBS. Let's do, yeah, NURBS right here. And I'm going to use a NURBS circle. You'll see it appears here down in this and down at the bottom. And that's basically where all my controllers are going to be coming from. Before I get started, I do want to make sure that I prep my model for rigging. So that's going to be involving a couple things. One is I'm going to be freezing transformations on my mesh. I will also be deleting my history on the mesh. Okay? You have to do that.
Do you want us to do any parenting?
We will get there.
Okay.
So you have to delete your mesh. Don't delete your mesh. Delete the history of the mesh, and then freeze your transformations. Okay? So that's gonna be really important. Everything needs to read 0 for basically on everything on the mesh. So let's go ahead and do that. You'll see that I am not reading 0 and everything. So let's go to modify freeze transformations. So that zeroes it all out. Then I'm going to go to edit, delete all by type history, and that deletes any extra history I have in here. Okay. The reason why we do that is because if you if the mesh is not frozen, then you may need to go in there at some point. If the mesh gets moved off away from a joint or it gets moved in some weird direction, you may need to place it back in its original position. If it's not already set to 0, then when you zero it out, it's not going to go to the right position for that joint. Okay, it's going to go to whatever that 0 point was originally for that mesh. Does that make sense why we're zeroing it out, why we're freezing the transformations? Okay. The reason why we are deleting history is because there might be something in the history that may get in the way of us rigging. There may be some node for a skin cluster or a UV unwrap that may be causing some problems. Additionally, a lot of the times when we're rigging, history is extremely important. So again, we don't want to clutter that with anything extra in there. We also don't want to slow down unnecessarily the Maya scene with extra history on the mesh. We're going to be adding a lot of stuff with parent constraints, with grouping, with all this other stuff. So just go ahead and delete it now and save yourself a headache later. Okay? Okay. All right. Ignore my n-gons right there. So I'm going to go under my outliner. Another big thing that I'm kind of going to be a stickler on with these assignments is going to be your outliner organization. This is going to be a huge deal with rigs. You have got to keep this stuff organized. There is so much crap that we're going to be putting together that if you can't keep everything named and keep everything straight, it is not going to end well for that rig. It's going to be hard to use. It's going to be impossible in some cases. So you got to make sure you name everything and keep it organized in the proper places. Okay? Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and actually take all of this geometry right here. I'm going to hit Control G, and I'm going to go and name that robot arm group. Okay? So this is going to be the first group that I'm going to actually make. We're going to have multiple groups inside the outliner for this rig. So actually it should be, I'm sorry, robot arm geo group. All right, so I'm doing this because this is where going to be all of the geometry for this rig is going to go. Okay? Yes?
So say your robot's already combined, do we need to like go back and separate the pieces?
Yes. Yes. It will make it easier for you to select the parts so that when we skin this to the actual joints, you won't have to worry about trying to do any sort of white painting. Okay? Okay. All right. Additionally, we need to know what each of these geometry pieces actually goes to. I have no idea what P cube 1 is. No idea. I should be able to. I should be able to look at that name and tell exactly what it is. So, what do you think I need to do?
Rename it.
Yeah, we're going to rename it. All right, so I'm going to click on this piece right here. That's P cylinder 1. Not anymore. That is robot underscore arm base. All right. I'm going to name this robot arm pivot. I'm going to name it base pivot. Robot arm, that's so tiny. So we're going to do basically just, we'll do elbow, or I'm sorry, shoulder, elbow, elbow 2, and then a wrist. So this will be robot arm, shoulder. And I do need to be putting in geo at the end of these. So I know what type of object it is. So this is a geometry object, so, or a mesh object. This will be robot arm elbow geo. Robot arm wrist geo. Robot arm wrist elevate geo. Just saying elevate since it goes up and down. Robot arm wrist twist geo, since that goes left and right. And then these guys actually need to be in the group 2. They got missed. So freezers.
Kind of like a giant, like a 5-board, pretty much.
What?
No, I'm saying like the outline pretty much like a giant, like 5-hooks board. Like
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's everything that's in the scene.
Okay.
So anyway, modify freeze transformations. delete by type, history. All right. So I got 5 P cubes, 4, 7, 6, and 5. 4 of these that I can work with. Since they're all basically the same thing, I can basically just give them one name and rename them all at the same time. So I'm going to actually go under modify, search and replace names. And they all share the same name. It's all P cube. So if I go in and put P cube for the search, and then I can replace it with, let's say, claw geo. Robot arm claw geo. And then we'll do it through selected, replace, and suddenly they're going to name all of these robot arm claw geo 4, 7, 6, and 5. And so that makes it really easy for me to go in and just rename the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Guys with me? So we're just renaming and we're starting to organize our outliner. All right? All right, anything you don't need in the outliner, just go ahead and delete. So these groups that were here before, I don't need them. I'm going to go and delete them. And we can go ahead and start creating. So I'm gonna actually start off with my world controller right here. So I'm just make a bigger controller. Hit Control D. Scale this in. This is going to be my root. I'm just going to place that. Robot arm worldcon. Robot arm rootcon. All right, so these two are going to sit right there. You'll notice that they do have translations or transformations on their scales. We will need to take care of that in a minute. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and start laying in my joints. So joints are basically just the bones of the puppet. Everything kind of is just either attached to the two joints or kind of hangs off the joints. So they're almost like an intermediary for a lot of different stuff. So like the controllers essentially will control the joints, and then the meshes are attached to the joints. So they kind of are intermediary for however stuff is supposed to move. Okay? So let's do, I'm going to go under modeling here, change it over to rigging. I'm going to go to skeleton, bring that over here, just tear that off. And I'm going to go to create joints. So I'm actually going to jump out into my quad view, and then I'm going to go into a side view. And so this is going to be useful with my character being basically in the origin of the world. It's going to be easy for me to like center things in pretty well. So that's a good place for it to be. I'm going to go under shading and click on X-ray. So this way I basically have like a 50% opacity on the character. And then I'm going to go ahead and start off with laying in my joints. So the first one is going to be this little guy right here. If your joints are too big or too small, you can go under preferences and your kinematics, and you can change the size of the joints, just in case you need it.
Sorry, how did you get that joint in the outline?
I just clicked. I went to skeleton, create joint, and it's a tool that allows us to create joints. So I still have it activated. So the first joint, I haven't clicked anywhere else. I haven't entered yet. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag another joint up. This base joint is going to essentially be my root joint. It's going to be the parent of all the other joints. It's going to be the great granddaddy of my claw joints. All right. There's going to be a lot of hierarchy going on here. So I'm just going to go and shift click and drag another joint. And this one is going to go right in the center of this pivot point right here. So basically where that screw hole is, that's where the arm essentially is going to pivot from, okay? So I need to put that right in the dead center of that, all right? I'm going to go and click and drag again. I'm going to do it one more time, right in the center here. Going to do it again.
And you just letting go and keep holding shift there.
I'm holding shift and clicking and dragging. Yeah. Now, if I didn't hold shift, the shift is simply just locking it to a vertical orientation, kind of like Photoshop when you're using the pen tool. So if I didn't, it would just, I could put joints wherever. So if you don't have a linearly orientated character, that's fine. Put it wherever you need to. So I have one here, and then I'm going to do another one. Now this one, says the wrist is rotating. I'm a little bit more free in where I can put it, but I'm going to go and put that joint right there. And then I'm also going to go ahead and do a tip joint. A lot of times on joint chains, I'll do an extra joint that goes essentially outside of the mesh, like you'll see on fingers, toes, claws, whatever. I'll usually put a little extra joint there. That's simply just so I can see the orientation moving of the joint chain as it's actually transforming. Because usually the end joint of a joint chain doesn't usually move when you apply transformations to it. So this one's really going to be kind of a null joint. It's not really going to be there for any particular reason other than like for me to attach things to it or just to see a transformation in action. So it's not really there for any like major rigging reason. But I always put it there again so I can use it to attach stuff to if I need to. All right. Okay. So in Outliner, we're going to have joint 1, joint 2, joint 3, joint 4. Just open up the rest of this. Hold down Shift and click on the little expansion button. It'll expand all of them for you. So that's kind of useful. We're going to go ahead and name each one of these, but I want to take a second to kind of make sure we understand what we're seeing here. So you'll see that each one of these is kind of stair-stepped under a parent. So you'll see joint 1, and you'll have like joint 2 underneath joint 1, and 3, and so on and so on. So this is an example of hierarchical parenting. So this is really important. This means they have a direct parent that they are associated with. Okay? So we can tell that joint 3 is associated with joint 2, joint 4 is associated with joint 3. So when I say, joint 6 is the child of joint 5, we can visually see that because of where it sits in the outliner. Additionally, we could see that joint 6 is the child of joint 5 because if we look at the way that the bones are set up here, you'll see that there's a direction that they're kind of pointing in. So it's pointing out from the base where we started, and it goes out to the tip of the joint chain, okay? So the one that they're all pointing to that's at the tip of the claw, that's basically like the great-great-great-great-grandbaby, all right? It has no children. It just got born.
When we're building the actual ones, do you want us to like have the geometry parented or doesn't matter?
To the joints?
No, not to the joints, just
To each other?
yeah.
No.
Okay.
No. We're not doing that.
Okay.
We're doing it properly.
Gotcha.
Because I know that's what Morin did when you guys did your robots. Right. This is not that far off conceptually from what he had you guys do. This is going to be a little bit more of a little different approach. Okay? Yeah.
So, as far as with parenting, like, with the function of the rig, what are the rules with the parent? Like, does it matter who's the parent as far as like the function of the rig?
Yeah. Hierarchical parenting is hugely important because depending on who the parent is, that depends on how the controls work. So let's say, for example, if I go ahead and grab this joint, you'll see that as I move, the children will always follow with it. Okay? If for whatever reason, its supposed parent was decoupled from it, so now we have joint 3 is no longer under joint 4, it doesn't follow joint 4. So if I click on joint 4 and rotate it, its child is not going to follow. So if that's a big point. Yeah, it's very important to understand how this works. But it's also pretty easy to fix because then I can just move middle mouse drag joint 5 back under joint 4 and boom, it's right back in there. You'll see the bone pops right back in and now it functions. So if I grab that joint, now it moves because they're parented together. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Let's go and start naming these. So this one is going to be, the base one is going to be called robot root joint. The next one is going to be called robot pivot. Actually, let's do robot shoulder pivot. So you'll notice that with each one of these, I have a very consistent naming convention system that I work with. This is important. All of you should come up with your own naming convention. It can be the same as mine, that's fine. But you have to keep a naming convention system that is consistent with your rig, okay? I always try to put the character's name in whatever I'm naming. I always try to put the associated part of the body, so if it's like a clavicle or shoulder, I always make sure and name whatever it is, John shoulder joint or John shoulder controller, okay? And then I always make sure and put a name of what type of thing I'm naming. So if it's a joint, I put JNT for joint. If it's a mesh, I put GEO for geo. If it's a controller, I put CON for controller. Okay, I try to make sure to stay consistent with these names. Are you guys having any flashbacks to SLR right now? When I'm like, I swear to God, you better name it NMP for normal maps.
I know, when you were saying to name everything in the outliner, it's just I remember going in when you have 100 objects.
Yeah.
And going in and making sure everything's named perfectly.
Oh yeah.
I remember that.
It's tedious as hell,
Yeah.
but if you don't do it, not only are you going to suffer with your grade, but it makes your job a lot harder because when you try to go in and rig that object without any named objects in there, it's almost impossible to understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
It's hard enough as it is, even when they are named.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to go in, imagine going into a Target in the middle of the day on a Wednesday and screaming out the name Easton. You're going to get 50 little kids running up to you. They're all named Easton these days. My nephew's named Easton. There's a lot of Eastons in the world.
One of my projects, I had a stack of 15 plates or something like that. One of my last SLR projects. I remember one of them moved or something. I was animating them. I just named it plate 1.
Right, but naming it at least helps you somewhat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Robot shoulder elevate joint. What is this going to be? Robot elbow elevate joint.
Would you say the best way to make sure all your parenting is correct, kind of click on each individual one and kind of see them lined up correctly?
You can just shift select and have it open up all together and just look at it. Robot, wrist, elevate, joint. Robot, wrist 2, elevate. Robot, wrist, twist, joint. Robot, arm, tip, joint. I'll put tip on there so I know that that's like the end of the joint chain. So, pretty easy. You will notice sometimes that, well, all times, that joints are going to have translates on them. I know I said to freeze transformations on everything. Do not, let me repeat that, do not freeze transformations on joints, okay? They do actually need to have that translate in there, okay? The reason why is because it is actually a measurement from the origin point of the world. So it is right now 3.4 Maya units in elevation, I guess, along the x-axis. So it needs to keep that in there. That is its coordinates, okay? So make sure you do that. Okie doke. I'm going to go and take the root joint. I'm going to hit Control G, group it to itself, and I'm going to go ahead and name that robot arm joint group. That did not work. Why did that not work? Robot arm joint group. There we go. All right, so now I have a geo group, I have a arm group, and I'm going to have a controller group in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and take the world con, and I'm going to go ahead and take the root con, and I need to go and start making more controllers. So actually, I'm just going to take this one right here, hit Control D. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and move this controller. Let's go and hold down V. And I'm going to snap it up to the next joint. And I'm going to hold down or do Control D again. Let's do V and snap it up to the next joint after that. So you'll see that I have a couple extra joints now. I'm going to go ahead and take both of these joints. I'm going to scale them down to right about there.
Do you think you press Control D or V?
Control D to duplicate, V to snap.
Okay.
And these will be the first controllers for my twist, my first elevate, and I'm actually going to need another. I need another controller up here for the twist. So snap it up to right about there. So there we go. Shrink that down if I want to. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and click my mesh since I kind of need to hide it for a second. So I'm going to put it on its own display layer down here in display. I'm going to add it to a new display layer. I'm actually going to set it to where it's locked so I can't select it anymore. Actually, let's tell you what, let's just go and hide it for a second. Okay. I'm going to hit Control D for this controller right here. I'm going to snap it up to this point on the joint, again using V, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees to where you'll see that it's kind of aligning with basically the axis that it's going to be turning on. It's going to be pivoting on that axis.
That's the double one?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Again, 90 degrees. And I probably could make these a little bit smaller. I think they're just too big for kind of what I'm doing. So I'm going to shrink them down just a little bit. I'm going to hide that mesh. The only reason I'm hiding it is because it makes it a little bit easier for me to snap up. Make sure you duplicate, then snap it. Snap it up again. Turn back on the mesh. Just kind of make sure everything looks good. All right, I think we're good. All right. So this is, we already named this one. It's going to be the Robot Arm WorldCon. This one is the Robot Arm RootCon. And then this one is Robot Arm RootCon 1. Well, I don't need it to be Robot Arm RootCon. I want it to be... this one is going to be controlling the twist of the shoulder from left and right. So this is going to be Robot Arm, let's call it Pivot Con. Actually, that's going to be Robot Arm Shoulder Pivot. Okay. Then this one will be Robot Arm Shoulder Elevate Con. Robot Arm Elbow Elevate Con. Robot Arm Wrist Elevate Con. Robot Arm Wrist 2 Elevate Con.
So all the ones that you're calling elevate, those are the vertical curves.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like, you know, elevate, you go up and down, pivot, you're rotating left and right.
If you forgot to put a controller at the bottom, can you just go back and add it, or
Mm-hmm.
and then reorder it in the outline?
We have not actually ordered them. Wait, did you say controller or joint?
Controller.
Yes. We have not actually ordered anything yet, so at this point you can add it wherever you want.
And then joints, it's a different story.
Technically, no. You can add a joint. You just need to make sure that you put it properly into the hierarchy. So if you accidentally forgot to put a joint here, and you just have a bone going from here to here, you could create a new joint, just stick it in there and add it in. Additionally, you do have on the skeleton tab, if you go down to Insert Joint, you can actually click and drag joints onto a bone. So if you need to put an extra one in there, you have that ability. Mm-hmm. Wrist twist con. All right. I do need to add an extra. Actually, I need to add joints for the claws. So let's go and add those in. So I'm going to go over to the Create Joints tool, and I need a joint essentially just where the pivot point's going to be, which is going to be somewhere right about here. And then I'm going to do a joint at the tip of the claw. Hit enter, and there you go. So I'm going to have 4 of these. So what I'm going to do is actually hit Control G, and you'll see it groups it to itself, but the grouping is going to be the origin of the world, which coincidentally is also in the center of the palm. So what I could do, I'm going to do a duplicate special, because I need 4 of these, right? So I need 3 more. Let me actually reset this. So I need 3, and I need this to be rotated around the origin point, rotated 90 degrees on the y-axis, and I should do it. So now I got 4 joints that are all basically where I need them to be for the claws. You guys follow me? Okay. All right, now these are going to be all in groups by themselves. I can just take these groups, and I'm actually going to put them under, actually let's grab the joints. I need to put the joints under their parent. So the parent could be 2 different things. It could either be the tip of the joint or tip of the claw, or it could be the wrist twist. It needs to be under one of these 2 because I want the wrist to be able to twist and spin freely, and so either one of those joints will do that. So why don't we just have them branch off and basically branch off from the wrist twist. So let's go ahead and grab each of these. Well, I guess I do need to name them, don't I? So let's do, here's an idea. I'm going to grab each one of these joints. Let's name them real quick. Search and replace. Joint. They're all named joint 1, so we're going to name them robot arm claw base joint. Replace. And Maya is not a fan of things being named the same, so I do need to go and put 1, 2, 3, 4 after each one of these. It's okay right now, but as soon as I take these out of the group, it's possibly going to cause me problems. So just better be safe than sorry. And then I'm going to do the same thing again, rename each one of these. Might actually save a little bit of work if you actually name these before you did the duplicate special, because then they would already be named, right? You just need to change the numbers. All right, so I'm going to take each one of these guys, and then we're going to go under the joint group right here. I'm going to middle mouse drag these under the wrist twist. So you'll see now these guys actually have a bone that actually goes into the wrist twist. Let me make that. Where am I looking for? Kinematics. There it is. You guys see the 4 bones coming off the center? So now they're actually parented under that one parent. So that's good. Excuse me. This little button right here. Little gear, dude running with a gear. You can also just go under Windows settings and preferences.
Okay, and you went to the rigging or kinematics and disable it?
No, it just says kinematics. Display kinematics, and then you can just change the joint size.
Gotcha.
And really, like, joint size doesn't matter. It's just a placeholder. That's all it is. It's not going to affect anything. Okay. So got that in there. I think we're ready to continue. So all of these controllers need to be history deleted and frozen. So I'm going to grab the controllers. Want to freeze transformations and delete history on them. At this point, I'm just going to do delete by type history. So I'm just really targeting just the controllers. And I'm also going to go ahead and group these into a singular controller group. So group 5 is now going to be robot, arm, con, group. Again, delete stuff you don't need in your outliner. So I'll get rid of those. Those are the groups that those fingertips are on when I did the duplicate special. And I need to go ahead and start ordering and actually parenting these controllers properly under each other. So this is basically us making the FK chain at this point. FK stands for forward kinematics, which means that we can pose a character based on its articulation points at every single joint individually. So it's almost like an action figure. You can, you can pose the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder, the waist. Everything's just an individual joint that you can pose with. Okay? So in order for this to work, I'm going to have to basically follow the same setup as the joints were parented to each other hierarchically. So I'm going to nest each one of these controllers under its respective parent. Okay? So I'm going to start with the end, this guy right here. That one, the wrist twist, needs to go under the wrist to elevate. So I'm going to go and take wrist twist and middle mouse drag it under the wrist to elevate. And so you'll see that now the wrist twist is under and parented to the elevate one. And just to illustrate what happened, if I click on the elevate con, you'll see that it highlights both itself and its child. And so if I rotate, you'll see that now it additionally rotates the child along with it. You with me? Okay. So what's the next one that needs to what's the next one that needs to be parented? Who does the wrist elevate belong to? The one below it. So what do I need to do in order to parent that? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take this one, and I'm going to middle mouse drag it to robot arm wrist elevate con. So that's going to be from here to here. So now if I select, you'll see that now all of the children, the child and the grandchild, both follow the parent. Okay? What's next? Huh?
The one below it, so you want to make sure.
So this one goes to this guy?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be elbow elevate, which is this one. So I'm going to take wrist elevate and go to elbow elevate. What's next? Simple answer.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
You get the arm bone to the shoulder bone. And
Yeah, basically, yeah. So that'll be shoulder elevate, which will be this one. Okay. Shoulder elevate goes to shoulder pivot. Shoulder pivot is going to go to arm root. and then arm root goes to WorldCon. So if we open all of these, you'll see that we have essentially all of these controllers all parented under their respective parents. And that means that when we grab one controller and move it, you'll see that the child, grandchild, and great-grandchild all follow along properly. Cool?
So they don't actually start pivoting until you parent all of them? Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's what makes it happen. Basically, we're kind of offsetting pivot points by using these groups or by giving these parents, because it's saying that now your pivot point for this object up here is now down here, and that means you have to follow everything that your parent does and everything your grandparent does. Make sense? Okay. All right. And so we're just going to go ahead and start essentially constraining the joints to follow their respective controllers. Okie doke? All right. So let's go and talk about constraints, because if this already wasn't confusing enough as it is, we're going to make it even more confusing by saying that there are two things called parents in Maya that mean kind of the same thing, but they're still different. You'd be like, great. All right, so let's talk about constraints. Constraints are essentially ways that we can constrain two objects to one another, so that one has either total control over the other one and moves at a 1-to-1 ratio, or it only has limited control over another object, to where it might only control like either scale, translations, rotations, or a combination of the three. Okay, so constraint isn't necessarily the same thing as nesting or hierarchical parenting like we have here. We can have two objects that are completely not even, like one of them's not anywhere near the other one in the outliner, but they will move together because there's a constraint between the two. Okay? And it's really important because we'll use that to basically constrain a controller to its respective joint or bone, okay, to get that to follow along.
The tension of each joint, pretty much, that's what constraints do.
What?
No, like constraints kind of like you're making the tension of each joint, so kind of controlling how much it moves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like a puppet string.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
All right. So we have different type of constraints. We have a parent, we have a point, we have orient, a scale, an aim, and a pole vector constraints. Those are what we will be using for these exercises. Namely, we're going to be working with parent and probably orient for this particular one, but let's talk about what each one of these constraints actually does. So let's grab some objects and talk about them. One, two, three, four, five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Okay. So, first up, we're going to talk about parent constraint. This is not the same thing as parenting that you guys have seen before with nesting an object under another object, like what we've talked about just now with, the outliner. This is same name. I wish they would just give it another name because it just makes it more confusing for you guys. But it is different, and I'll show you how it is different. Okay, so a parent constraint, you're going to grab the parent, the child, and then you go to constrain. Okay? So what we will see is that under the child, you see that these two objects, p cube 8 and p cube 1, are not nested underneath each other. They're separate in the outliner. They're completely separate. But what we have is now a little parent constraint that pops up under the child. Okay, it's just a little tag that says, I belong to P cube 8. Okay? So what that means is that when I grab the parent and move it around, you'll see that it moves at a 1-to-1 ratio. So I control the rotation, I control the orientation, I control the translation. I don't control scale. I mean, it will change basically its offset from the origin or from the center point of the parent, but it does not actually control scale. And we can actually verify this if we go and click on the child. We'll see that we have a translate and rotates all essentially have this blue highlight here next to them. They have a blue key. That means that it has an incoming connection from another object, this one being its parent. Okay? So essentially this guy is duct taped to its parent. Okay. Now, how is this different from a regular hierarchical parenting, where the one object is under the other object, and it does the same thing? I mean, it literally does the same thing. I can move it, I can rotate it, but if I move the hierarchically parented object away from its parent, this is like a free-range, parent in Kmart. It doesn't care. The kid can run away, do its own thing, go over to aisle 28, start messing some shit up. But he'll always stay, in proximity of the parent. So with a hierarchical constraint, this kid's on a leash, and he has to stay exactly in one position the entire time. If I move the child over here to play with the other kid in the cereal aisle, as soon as mommy or daddy says or does anything, boom, pops right back to its original position. Okay? That's a difference.
Wait, how did you get it to pop back into its position?
I literally touched the parent and moved it, and it just went right back to its original position.
So the hierarchy.
Huh?
That's the hierarchical.
This is constraint. This is hierarchical. Yeah, so this is what we're used to. This is what we've seen before. This is using the constraint. Okay? So, this is useful in a couple of different ways. One is we can key the relationship. We can turn it on and off. Okay? We can actually go under the constraint and right here, under P cube 1, and we have an option where it says P cube 8, WO. I can actually key that on and off, 1 to 0. If I take it to 0, kid just turned 18. You don't care what daddy or mommy says anymore. But maybe the kid regresses and loses their job and they have to move back home. Boom. They're right back with them. All right?
So constrainer would be useful for for instance, getting a ball, picking it up and make sure it sticks to your hands and you can throw it. So.
Exactly. That's a really good example. That's what I use in addition just to normal rigging. Parent constraints are perfect for doing object constraints to hands. So I may have Louis might have a baseball bat,
Right.
or I don't know, a saxophone or whatever he wants to have. But we can do a parent constraint and have a control system so that we can actually switch what that saxophone is connected to.
Yeah.
Is it connected to his hand or is it connected to his other hand? So for example, the film Oni, my red Oni, Roni, had this big demon blade. And I had a control system to where it actually would snap from one hand to another.
Right.
If I needed him to hand off the weapon from one hand to another or change his grip on the weapon. So I could do that. Or if I wanted him to drop the weapon, I could have it to where it would disengage from both hands and it's just its own object. So that's exactly what the parent constraint's used for.
No, the reason why we're character animation with that, Melissa, and we're kind of messing with the kind of stuff right now too. So
Yeah. I mean, there's other ways of getting characters to hold things.
Right.
That's just one way.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's parent constraint. We understand that it's different from hierarchical parenting, right? Does anyone have any questions, or is there any questions I can answer about that at this time?
Just really quick. So constraints is pretty much like anytime you just move the parent, the child goes back right to it.
That's going to happen,
And
yeah.
then like the hierarchy, you kind of just, yeah.
I mean, it's still under the parent,
Right.
but there's another degree of freedom there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
When do you use them? Two different ones, right? Like,
if you watch me, you will see it when I'm rigging.
okay.
Well, like I just explained it, like I would use the parent constraint for like doing objects.
Yeah.
You're going to see me when I do parent constraint to constrain a controller to a joint, or you'll see like if I do like a look at controller for eyeballs, there's special constraints we can do for that as well. There's different places we'll use them, and if just watching, you'll see me bring them in at different times.
Nice.
Okay? Okay. All right, next one is going to be a point constraint. So I'm going to do parent, child, point. All right. So this one seems very familiar, right? What is this one already looking like? Huh? Parent constraint, exactly. But there's a difference. If I rotate this one, it does not have rotational values put onto its child. So whereas this one, I can rotate this and it sticks with the child sticks with the parent. This one does not actually influence rotation. I can rotate the child. I can rotate this. They are free. You'll see that as I move this one around, it does not snap the rotation back to its original point. Except if I move, you'll notice it does snap the translation back to its original point. We can verify this. Clicking on the child, you'll see it has an incoming connection on the translate X, Y, and Z. It does not have an incoming connection on the rotates or scales. Cool?
And this is a constraint, right? Just making sure.
This is a constraint.
Okay. So, alright, makes sense.
You said parent, child, point?
Yep. All right, next we're going to do orient. So, parent, child, orient. All right, I want to move it. That doesn't work. Let me try to scale it. That doesn't work either. What about if I rotate it? It has a 1-to-1 rotational value. So they're doing the twist together. They're dancing. Hey, Will, why don't you stand up? Wake up. All right, so orient, it orients an object. It makes it twist, makes it rotate with its parent. Okie doke? Okay. This would be really good if you wanted to do like synchronized movement of objects, maybe like you have gears or something that are moving. You could have like all of the children orient constrained to a controller, and then you can just like turn, that controller, and maybe it orients and rotates the wheels or gears in that machinery. So that could be a good reason to have that. Okay. All right, next one is going to be scale. So what do you think that one controls? Scale. Gee, I wonder what it could be if it says scale. So yeah, clearly it's not going to do that. It's not going to do this, but it is going to do scale. All right, so if you need to remotely control the scale of an object, boom, there's your trick. Now, you may have noticed that as soon as I clicked on the constraint, it actually snapped it to the same size as the parent object. Okay, so that actually brings up a point that I'm going to make, is that when I'm making constraints, you do need to be aware of the options under the constraints. So, a lot of the time, I will have maintain offset turned on. In this case, it was not. Maintain offset means whatever the offset is for this object, if it's offset from the scale, from the position, from the rotation, it will maintain that when the constraint is placed. If you have maintain offset turned off, that means we're going to go real helicopter parent on this kid, and he's going to have to do every single thing the parent does. Like, I went to dental school, you're going to go to dental school too. I don't care what you want to do. You know? Carter's like,
Yeah, makes sense. Right, so actually.
No one ever said that the parents wanted you to do what they wanted? No?
Oh no, I meant like animation ones.
No? Yeah.
No one's like, I did animation, you're doing it.
Oh. My son is definitely going to be an animator, whether he wants to be or not.
But what if he wants to be a ballerina?
He could be he could be a ballerina, but he needs to at least have some sort of animation thing going on too. I mean, just do something.
He could do a rotoscope ballerina.
I mean, yeah, when he's 4, that's fine. We can move beyond that. Jeez. That's like level 1. Come on. All right. So anyway, the maintain offset just allows us to maintain any differences between the parent and the child if we desire to keep them. Okay? There may be times you don't want to maintain an offset. That's fine. Just make sure you know that if it like suddenly shoots over to wherever the parent is, it's probably because your maintain offset was not turned on. All right? Okay, so you just turn it on, hit add, boom, we're good, we're done. He still scales, but he's his own person, and he's going to scale at his own size. What?
What would you use this kind of constraint for?
Scale?
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted to like scale a rig, like all as like one piece, you could use that constraint to scale the mesh and the joints and everything. So that would be a reason to have it. If you needed like, if you're doing a lightsaber, this is kind of a weird reason for it, but like you could do a scale constraint to have like the blade extend like in a certain, like scale in a certain direction. So you could use that too. So yeah, I don't use scale too much, but that would be something I would use it for. What?
Like how a little lightsaber, like the laser comes from the handle and it goes out.
Yeah, I mean it would scale like in the Y direction, right, or the Z. Yeah.
So you can animate it so like it like over here. So like.
Mhm.
would it stretch to get beats together?
Yeah. All right. Aim constraint. So, parent, child, aim. So aim is kind of interesting because it is technically an orient constraint, but it's kind of cool. This one we'll use as a look at controller for eyeballs, and you'll understand why.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like that dude that's in the cafeteria that won't stop staring at you when you walk in. Gary, stop it. Yeah, so it's pretty useful. I like this one. I've used this for, I mean, eyeballs, like obviously, but like I did this giant, I called it the Big Bertha cannon. It was like this big walking mech, and it had this gigantic like artillery cannon, but then it had all these like little like missile launchers on like the 4 corners of the robot. And so it had controllers where you could like whip around the controller to like track targets, and so the turrets would move and track the targets. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, it was cool. But yeah, that's, you know, you could use it for all sorts of stuff. But
Could you add like a delay on that? Like if it moved, it would like for like the turrets, like it wouldn't like move like directly with it, right? Wouldn't there be like a delay to that?
you could animate the delay.
Okay.
Yeah, you could animate. You just, if you wanted it to move like just a little bit slower, you could do that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I wanted like these quick. If you ever look at like naval ships, they have these turrets that like just whip around really quickly. Like, yeah, it was kind of cool. Anyway, so those are going to be the main constraints. We also have a pole vector constraint, which it's basically used for IK systems, but I'll show you kind of what it means. Essentially, it's going to be used for like legs or elbows. So essentially, it's knee or elbow. That's like almost entirely what I use pull vector constraints for. It's essentially an orient constraint, but to make the knee follow. So you can make him do like Elvis Presley, you know, where he's like shaking his leg. Or you can do like an elbow, where you can have it follow along if you're animating. So that's pretty useful too. But that's mostly for elbows and knees and legs and stuff like that. So, all right. So those are the different types of constraints, and we'll be using most of those for these assignments. Okay. Any questions about that?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
About maintaining offset.
Yeah.
Like you're using the orient constraint, and you have maintain offset all in.
I actually have maintain offset turned on for all of them.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so you just keep it off usually.
It really depends on what you want to use it for. If you wanted to like orient something to specifically to a controller, or orient a controller specifically to an object, you could have maintain offset turned off, and it would snap it over and orientate it directly to what you're wanting. But usually, I will probably have this turned on, maintain offsets turned on. So usually I'll have it turned on, but there are cases you will turn them off, just to simplify that answer. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started on actually constraining the joints to their controllers. So we're going to be doing the first one is going to be the root, and that is going to get constrained to the root joint. So that's going to be parent, child, and then I'm going to go under constrain, and I'm going to use the parent constraint. All right. Next one is going to be the base twist controller. That's going to be parent, child, and I could do a parent or I could do an orient. Really what I need is for this thing just to rotate, okay? There's really no difference in my, what I'm getting, what the finished product is going to look like. So just to mix it up, let's do orient. We'll do the same thing here. We'll do an orient, 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 and orient. Okay? Now, it's a lot of orient constraints. Why not use the parent? If I had a controller that needed to translate off somewhere, then I could put a parent constraint in there. But since I don't need that, I'm just going to be doing orient constraints. Okay? Just make it simple. So, if we go ahead and check this out, we should get rotation. Good. There we go. Good. 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 And good. Voila. And just to check everything, since I want to be able to move everything around in the world, just grab the world control and move it around, and there you go. That is a successful FK joint chain with controllers attached. So that same setup would be used for a tail. If you want to do like a jointed tail with controllers, that same setup could be used for an arm, leg, spine, a real simple spine. It's a very, very useful, very simple way to create an effective rig. All right? Okay, any questions at this point? Okie doke. All right, so next we're going to go ahead and attach our mesh, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and take essentially the applicable piece of mesh and attach it to its joint. So this is going to be really, really simple. Again, each piece of this a robot is separated into multiple parts, very specifically, so I don't have to paint a damn thing with skin weighting. Okay? Make it super simple for me. I'm literally just going to grab the mesh. I'm going to grab the applicable joint. I'm going to go to Skin, Bind Skin, Options, and I'm going to go to make sure Selected Joints is selected. Bind method, let's do Reset. Yeah. Closest distance and Classic Linear. So that means that the fact that this joint is selected, it's going to bind the mesh to only this joint. Okay? Click Bind. We'll see that now if I click on this joint, or click on this mesh, you'll see we now have an input called Skin Cluster 1. You with me? Bind the skin. So now if I go ahead and twist, you'll see that the mesh twists and is actually joined to the rig. All right?
You doing this because like earlier when you were messing with the joints itself, it wasn't moving the whole thing?
It was not moving the mesh. So therefore, we are attaching the mesh to the joints. Okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and grab the next piece. Grab the next joint. I'm going to go to, again, up to Skin. Bind Skin. I've already got my selections. So I'm just going to do Bind Skin. Done. Next piece. Bind Skin. Bind Skin. Bind the skin. Now I'm just, again, skinning it to the joint that it's going to be moving off the pivot point of. I'm not grabbing anything else. I'm going to grab this.
Were you just hitting G?
Yep, I'm just redoing it.
And that's like less used function there.
You got it. Yeah.
So if we download like a robot arm off the online, should we orient the arm? Because most of them are like already like posed. Should we make it like straight? Like straight out like yours?
I would, just because it's going to make it a lot easier for you to work with. I mean, if it is posed, I mean, there's nothing that stops you from rigging that. I mean, it's just, I could pose this and still rig it and have the same exact thing, have the same exact result. It's just that having this orientated vertically makes it a lot simpler for me. I don't have to worry too much about joint placement. So if I can simplify the process for myself, I'm going to do it, because I believe completely in making your job easier. But that's just me. All right. So I'm going to take each one of the claws and attach them to their respective joint.
And you're selecting the geometry first and then the joint? Or
It actually doesn't matter. You just it's going to be looking for a mesh and a joint. Yeah, it really doesn't matter with this. It's just going to be like, hey, is there a joint? Yes. Is there a skin? Yes. All right. Let's bind them. Yeah. All right. So you'll see that now when I rotate that joint, that one's attached. Everything else is attached. Let's just make sure everything moves. Boom. There we go. All right. You guys good? Okay. I got 10 minutes. Ready to go for the bonus round? Sep Driven Keys, go! All right, Sep Driven Keys. So for each one of these controllers, we can add attributes. We can add extra stuff. So I'm going to go to Edit, Add Attribute. I'm going to do this on my wrist twist, simply because that's the most logical place for me to put a extra attribute to open and close the claw. On your robots this week, I don't really care what the Sep Driven key is. It just needs to be something. Okay? If you want to follow my suit and have like an opening and closing claw, do it. But I need to have something set driven keyed. So for this one, if you open up the add attribute, I'm going to go and give it a name. Claw, open, close. I'm going to give it a float. So that means it's going to float between two different values. And the values can be, I usually do 0 and 1, or -1, 1, or really whatever values you want. But I usually will put the default at 0. I always put the default at 0. Let's just say that. So my minimum is going to be closed. That's going to be 0. Maximum value is going to be, let's say 10. That's going to be open. Okay? Numerically, there's really no difference between 0 and 10 and 0 and 1. You can put infinite number of decimals in between. It really doesn't matter. But whatever works for you. Hell, you could do 0 and 100. Still, same thing. So, going to add. Now we have open and close right here. You can middle mouse drag, and you'll see it goes from 0 to 10. Now, that needs to drive the let's say rotate Z axis on these joints, so that at 0 the claw is closed, and at 10 the claw is open. That's what a set driven key does. We can put different values in. So I'm going to go to animation, key, set driven key, set, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my driver. My driver is going to be this controller, since that is what I'm loading values into with my claw open close. Since that's where the input is coming from. I'm going to click load driver, and then my driven is going to be whatever is getting the orders, whatever is being told to move. So that in this case is going to be the joints. You with me?
Wait, so when you load driver, that's the JavaScript, the claw, or what did you put for load driver?
Driver is the controller,
Which,
the one that I just put the attribute on. Okay, so I'm going to go and grab all these joints. I'm going to go ahead and select the attribute that I added that's going to be under driver, the claw open close, driven. I want, let's see. For all of these, it is going to be rotate Z, it looks like. So let's see, I'm going to go and grab rotate Z. So at a value of 0, I want the claw to be closed. Well, it's not actually 100% closed. Let's go and maybe fix that. So at a value of 0 for that attribute, I'm going to go ahead and rotate that in just a tiny, tiny bit. I'm going to hit key. You'll see a little blue mark come in here, so we know there's an incoming connection. That means there's an incoming connection from the set driven key. So if I go to the controller, claw open close, I'm going to go and set the next value, which is going to be 10. That's going to be my max value. I'm going to go ahead and grab these joints again. I'm going to go to rotate Z, and I'm going to go and open up the claw as far as I want. And there we go. I'm going to go hit key. So now, if I go to, so I set two values at two different positions on this attribute. So I'm going to grab that attribute, middle mouse drag, and now I am controlling all 4 claws at the same time. And I can open and close it pretty easily. Otherwise, if I did controllers, I would have to basically assign a controller to every single one of those joints. I would have to constrain a controller to all those joints. I would have to grab all those controllers on all those joints, and I have to move all those controllers on all those joints. So I think this is easier.
Yeah.
Especially when the controllers, the claws are going to be moving at the same value pretty much the whole time. I mean, it's robotic, right? Now, I probably might not use this for something like human fingers, because our fingers, while we can tell it to make a fist or make it open up like that, we have a lot of range of motion here, and all of our fingers move in different directions and different angles and different speeds. So it probably wouldn't be the best thing to put on something like a hand, but for a robotic claw that all the stuff needs to move at the same speed and the same position at the same time, that makes a lot of sense for me to put a Sep Driven Key there. Okay, I did a thing where I made a spaceship that had this docking system where like I did a Sep Driven Key, and I had these claws that would like latch onto the docking clamps of this other ship. And so I had this thing where it could basically like automatically like dock and then undock, and it was kind of an easy, simple thing to set up, but it saved me a lot of time because I didn't have to animate this whole system where it would do all this stuff automatically. So it was pretty cool. Other things I might do for Sep Driven Keys might be automated muscle blend shapes. So like when I move my arm in like this, there is some amount of muscle that's flexing here when I move my arm in, and then when I move my arm out, the muscle's relaxing, right? So there's going to be a bunching up of the flesh here when I move my arm in and out. So with a creature, I might have a Sep Driven Key that drives a blend shape under here that might actually make the bicep swell and stretch in order to get some of that more realistic movement. So pretty useful stuff. All right, so it's 3:17 and we rigged a whole freaking thing. Woo, awesome. Last but not least, I'm gonna take all three of these groups, I'm gonna group them together into one character group, robot arm char group. And so I have essentially three main groups here: a geo group, a joint group, and a con group. Okay, every single rig you guys make for me are going to have at least these three groups, and all three of these groups are going to be under a singular char group. That means I should be able to grab this one char group and move everything around, and basically, control the character from that point. Okay, it just simplifies everything, because if you have like 3 or 4 characters in your scene, I would not want a unparented or ungrouped rig mixing in with everything else. It's going to be really super confusing to look at. So organize, all right? Name everything. Freeze your transformations. Delete your history. Okie doke? Okay. Any questions? You guys feel shell shocked? Kennedy? Geo, joint, con. And those all need to be under a char group. Okay. All right, guys. I'll see you next class.